is to get this out, have you guys log in and move through pretty quickly. So I'm going to hit some key highlights where I think there'll be questions, and then obviously we can hopefully save some time for Q&A. I've already logged into the platform for time's sake, but everyone will have the opportunity to sign up, as was noted on Friday. You will need a sort of two-factor authentication mechanism, meaning a mobile phone will be important because we'll need to text you a code for your security, and you'll have to do that every time you log in. But I think people are very accustomed to doing that. But you'll get an opportunity on Friday, well before this platform opens, to actually start the application to make sure all those hiccups might be behind you. So once you're in the platform, what you'll see here first and foremost is what information you need to be equipped to do the application. It's obviously in the program guide and the actual written application, but it's also here as well. You also need to remember that you will need to be the authorized signer to actually navigate this application correctly and ultimately sign the DocuSign ceremony at the end. It's important to note that because if you're, for example, an accountant that may not have the authority to sign obligations on behalf of this restaurant or your company, but you're going to want to engage that individual either side by side or working with you to go through this application. Otherwise, you'll have to attest and authorize at the end. So we'll get to that here in a few moments. The interesting thing that you'll see on the screen is a few options. Number one, you can go right into start a new application, or you can actually take a guided tour. I'm going to give everyone a guided tour, so we'll skip that option. But if you're on Monday, if you want to actually go through it, this actually walks you through with some helpful tips and tricks all the way through the application process. So know that that's available as you guys get moving. The other item here before we start is a need help icon on the lower right. Anytime you're traversing this application and have a question around a specific topic, if you click this, you'll be able to go and access resources that have been put together by the SBA. As an example, if I say, I don't really know what an EIN is, you'll get an article that'll talk you through what an EIN is. If you need to question around your affiliates, there'll be an article there. So your first course of action is going to be to leverage the knowledge base. If for some reason it still doesn't get you where you need to be, you can send a message in the platform, or you can reach out to the customer service center by telephone. But please feel free to use this knowledge base and give us feedback if there's a question that maybe is not addressed in that as you work through the application. Let us know that via the messaging that I'll show you in a minute, and then we'll add that for the next restaurant owner that may come behind you. So let's hop in. This is all a test environment, but we'll hop into the application and walk through a couple important points. You'll see on the screen really a workflow type of process left to right. On the left-hand side, there's statuses that this application will go through. Of course, now we're just beginning, so we're in application in progress. We will venture down the list all the way to Irs Verification step. The SBA will review this process and this application. If we have any additional documents we need, it may go to additional information needed. Ultimately, SBA will make a decision on this award, and then ultimately will provide a direct payment to the bank account information that you provide during the application. So it's very easy. You'll be able to apply via the portal, and you'll also be able to take and check your status of your award at any given time. So not only will the SBA send email notifications when the status changes or they need more information, if you check this a few times a week or a day, that is, you can also see where it is and keep in touch with that. So that's always on the left-hand side of the application. The first item that I'll walk through is eligibility. You'll have to answer a series of questions that are important before you can begin to advance. You can see those questions and they're on the application as well. For the sake of time, I'll navigate pretty quickly through these, and of course I'll have to hit no. The other item that's interesting, we use extensive use of sort of hover informational guides. So in this case, has the location been permanently closed? Naturally it's yes or no, but obviously if it's no, there's some caveats around, well, is it temporarily closed, right? So look for these helpful tips and tricks. If you have a question on these, you can hover over here and it'll tell you a little bit of information maybe that didn't naturally fit in the text here. So for this sake, I'm just going to hit no, and then I'm going to navigate to the next screen. Then I come to business details. I'm not going to read all the text on the page, but obviously what's very important in this program, I think as Patrick highlighted, is the priority period and your priority election, right? So take your time on this section, right? We need to make sure this is accurate. Again, if you have a hover around what's socially disadvantaged mean, you can use the hover tips and get that information. Ultimately, you're going to make the election and move through the application that way. right? Same thing for franchise. This application has a searchable list of franchises that you can leverage as you fill this out, which is helpful. And you'll work your way through the application as I'm doing here. You have to pick a restaurant type, right? Of course, this is where you're regulated in your locale or under which you want a license, right? So make the right designation there. This is important because we're going to require a specific documentation depending on the specific type of restaurant establishment you indicate here. So obviously, if it's an inn or if it's a bakery, there's some other documentation that you'll be prompted in later parts of this application. Moving on to section 3, business identification. I think this is fairly straightforward, but a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, organizational type is very important, right? Not only what organization type you are, but how your tax election, right? So this is important ultimately because we're taking your information, going to the IRS and verifying the data that you provide, right? If and for some reason you make the wrong election here or selection, that may hold up the review process. So if you have any questions as you traverse this application regarding your tax forms or your formation type, you may want to consult your tax advisor or CPA because it is important because of the interfacing and the verification that's done. So just as a tip, we try to make sure, as an example, if you're a sole prop, right, you'll see that, okay, the business legal name in that case is grayed out. You don't have to provide it because you'll have to provide it in the sole prop case, your first and last name. Similar idea. We don't let the individual, for example, if you're let's say a C corporation, and let's just go through that example, right? You'll notice you can't provide an SSN in that case, right? Because you obviously don't have an SSN that owns the C corp. So we do things like that. If you find, well, why can't I pick EIN? Well, it's probably because you are not structuring the business entity correct. So always make sure if you have an issue there, double check that. The address was pretty interesting. We have a searchable auto-populate address feature on the tool. It doesn't mean everyone's address will be found, but 99% of the time it will be. This is a USPS address routine, so feel free to use it if this helps you move faster through the application. Ownership, again, fairly straightforward. Put in the owner, business or person, put in the requisite identifiable information, and then move through the application. Right, it is important that we collect 20% ownership. Right, you have the option to put up to 20 owners of 1% if required. Right, so take your time on this section. You can add additional business owners if you wish, and iterate through that. So fairly straightforward. Demographic information is very important to the SBA. Of course, is optional, but take your time on that section as well. And then there's some affiliation information that we gather. Right, take your time on this section. There's a great knowledge-based article around affiliation. If we have time, we can talk about that more today. But make the right affiliation selection. Obviously, that's a very important control with regard to this application process. So this is your first screen of substance that you'll hit, which is business details. Okay, award calculation. We'll move quickly through this screen. You'll first tell the SBA how you anticipate to use the award, right, from the award date to March 11th, fairly straightforward. In production, your PPP loans will automatically populate to the extent that they align with your tax identifier you're using. So if for example, I used a real life EIN that had 2 PPP loans, they'd automatically populate in here, which is a nice feature, right? Double check they're the right values. And if you need to give the SBA information around additional PPP loans that you may have provided under a different tax identifier in the context of perhaps the 2021 cycle, you can do that here, and you can add a loan. And then finally, the award calculation is driven by tables. If you look at the application today, you'll see table 1, 2, 3, and an aggregate table 4, right? For this purpose, I'm just going to use table 1. Obviously this has to be relevant to your individual circumstance. The vast majority of folks will probably fall in, table 1, if not table 2. But take your time on this section. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to do some random numbers. Locations. Oops. The location has to be relevant to the EIN or SSN you're using. Listen, hit the calculate award amount, and then you'll see here I have $250,000 of awards. So this automatically calculates based on your input and your date of operation. Again, what I would recommend is that you have filled out that sample app and you're prepared with what's relevant to your business, and that may be table 1 or that may be a table 4. Table 4 is a flexible option, called a hybrid option, that if, for example, you had multiple locations over successive years that may have opened up at different times, right, you obviously will need to do that aggregation and provide that supporting documentation to the SBA, but ultimately you can provide an aggregated award request into this form. You know, we've done some nice things. We have a template for calculation for Table 4 that you can download and use as a way to show the SBA effectively your work around Table 4. Again, we don't anticipate a large number of Table 4 filers, so to speak, but if you happen to fit in that situation because of your situation, that feature is there. And as we get feedback through the pilot, we're actually enhancing some of the optimization, the work around these tables. So it'll look a little different ultimately when you arrive here next Monday, but the basic concept of pick your table, pick your information, and move forward. One of the other, I think, really nice items the SBA has done for the restaurant program is we provide an automated account linking service. And what this does, it uses an automation behind the scenes that allows you to put in, as an example, your Wells Fargo bank account, your username and password, and it automatically pulls in the routing and account number from Wells Fargo relevant to your operating account, and allows you then to select the relevant account and move through the process. If I'm not obviously using a real life credentials during this live event, but if I were, and I had my EIN in here, I could actually link that account and walk through it. So what I can probably do is, let's see if I can make up one on the fly here for us. Okay, so you'll see connect your bank account. Hopefully this comes through in the screen share. And this is obviously connecting to real live banks. So I'm not going to put in my commercial credentials here, but if I were, I can pick my relevant bank. Let's say it's Wells Fargo. Perfect. Wells Fargo has multiple available. I know I'm a Wells Fargo just sort of natural business customer, and then I can give that information. So you may ask, why does SBA do this? For really two main reasons, right? Very often human error is quite common when people enter their account and routing numbers because of the length of these numbers. So number one, it allows us to automate that, and so you don't have to triple check and we have to do a bunch of corrections because that'll delay funding. The other thing under the covers it allows us to do is verify the identity of the bank account and the restaurant account holder, right? So we know when you're applying through the award, the information you give us, the operating account, is legitimately the restaurant's operating account and is not another actor's account, which is very important. If you do not use this Plaid automated service, we do allow manual account linkages. We do message that this has to be reviewed by a human being on a one-to-one basis. So this is inevitably much slower, right? There's a control framework around this. So if Plaid and that automated account service works for you, we'd recommend you do that. If for some reason you may have a bank that's not available, or you may not feel comfortable putting in your credentials to this automated secure service, then you can certainly provide your bank account information here, and that will work. That just may delay the review process for a few days. There's a great article, the knowledge base around how this works, and if you have any questions, the call center is equipped to help folks navigate through it. But I wanted to highlight that as a nice feature, and really will save you time and make sure we get the money and the relief to you as quickly as possible. All right, what I want to do here for the documentation is actually pick Table 2. It's probably one of the more common documentation sections. So let me talk about documentation sort of at a high level. We're also continuing to optimize how we receive documents from restaurant owners. But at the end of the day, this documentation supports your award requests. So what I would say is sort of a common interpretation of this is provide to the SBA everything that one would need to substantiate your values. If you're putting in a 2019, 2020 sort of Table 1, Table 2 type of calculation, then of course we're going to need the requisite tax returns or point of sale information to make sure that is a legitimate substantiated award. So when I look at these documentation sections on systems like this, I first ask myself, first, am I responsive to the ask on the screen, right? Am I getting my IRS tax returns? But secondary, there may be other supporting information, such as a third-party accountant set of information that might make the SBA's review that much better and easier, right? If we have an independent third party attesting to the documentation that which you provide, that's very high-quality data. Right, so do not be shy to provide additional documentation that might be over and above responsive to what's here, but we've made this very simple. You have to attest that you're accurate in terms of what you're providing, You'll pick here, say I'm providing my tax year 2019. I'll just do this real quick, right? You'll look on your computer for your tax forms, and I'm just going to make up a tax form here. I'm going to upload the document. It can't be larger than a 35 meg document. And then when you hit the little green check, you know you're responsive to the 2019 tax returns, right? And that's what you're doing. You're uploading 2019. If I did the same for 2020, and ultimately when I'm done, it'll tell me I'm done, all green check boxes, and then I'm moving forward. We do request 3 months of bank statements, and that can be, of course, one big PDF document of 3 months. It could be 3 individual PDFs, however you wish to provide it, for 2 reasons. Number one, that helps when we do the manual bank account review. And 2, it allows us to make sure that it's an operating entity with history and transactional behavior that's representative of a restaurant. So take your time on this section as well, right? You're going to see that regardless of the calculation method that you may select. And obviously at the bottom, we show the documents, and if you need, as an example, to delete or to refactor, you have the option to do that right here. Okay. So we're moving fast, but hopefully you guys are getting a flavor of you're just left to right, you're just putting in the information, and again, if you're prepared, I think hopefully everyone is seeing how hopefully simple this is. This page right before the signing ceremony is very important. You're telling the SBA who is signing the documentation, the actual application for your award. There's 2 points I would call your attention to. Number one, there's a title section here. This title is required by the IRS. It may not be exactly what you call yourself as a proprietor of this restaurant. So as an example, I don't recall exactly what organization type I had, but in the eyes of the IRS, this is the relevant tax titles that you must name yourself. And that's important, again, because we're sending this documentation to the IRS, they're validating it. So my recommendation here would be if you can remember or recall via your IRS forms what title was there, that's what you want to put here, or just make sure it's one of the relevant titles to your corporation, right? If you're a sole prop, you're not going to see the option to be CEO, as an example. There's just very specific titles. So don't let that throw you off, so to speak. There's some guidance here. There's also SSN and date of birth. And the reason that's important, we're not going to be able to demo this today because of this live environment, is we're ultimately going to ask you a series of identifying questions, such as, did you live at this location in the past 4 years? Do you know this individual that might be your brother? Right? Everyone's comfortable with these KBA questions, and the reason we do that is to make sure the person who's signing the document is in fact the person who's signing the document. Right? We want to know if it's Ben Wallace, based on his date of birth and his SSN, that I actually am the person, right? So there's no disagreement down the line that the obligation was taken by Ben Wallace. So take your time again on this, and this is where, to my earlier comment at the beginning, if you're not the authorized owner of the applicant, you're going to want to have that person work with you through this process. That's very important. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to sign the document. And then ultimately at the end, obviously I didn't fill in most of this application. It's going to tell you, are there any missing items that you have not completed, right? You'll have the opportunity to go and correct it. And ultimately, then I'll go to the bottom and sort of see a summary of the award, how much I'm asking for, where it's going, and then I'll have an option to sign and submit the application. What the SBA has done around this application is we've kept it in sort of the browser, right? We're not going to send you an email for the DocuSign envelope. The minute that you hit sign and submit, it's going to move you into a DocuSign or electronic signature process. You'll have to answer those questions that I spoke about. If you get those questions correct, you'll have the opportunity to actually sign the document. And what you'll sign is a 2-part document. You'll sign what's called a 4506T, or effectively a tax consent, and you'll sign the actual official application that the SBA has on their website. We'll automatically populate both of those documents for you based on your answers that we just went through. And ultimately, you'll make all the attestations. You'll have to read that very closely to make sure you're comfortable with what it's saying. And you'll hit the sign button, just like you guys have probably done numerous times in other legal documents that people have used DocuSign for. And that really is the process. Once you sign the DocuSign envelope right there, right within the session, you come right back to the screen. We tell you a confirmation number, and we also eventually allow you to download the actual application for your records if you wish, and your application process is done. Right? We anticipate, as Patrick said, that's about a 25-minute process if all goes well. If there's any questions that the SBA has after that, we'll contact you via this platform or potentially by phone if required, but most likely through the platform. If at any time you have a question either before you submit or after you submit, you have a messages dialog up here that allows you to send specific messages to the correspondence team that will be staffed, and it is staffed today, answering questions. Or you can potentially ask a global question around anything around this program if you use sort of the global inbox. So both of those are available to you at any given time of the application. You can always go back in after you submit and look at the application. You won't be able to change it unless the SBA authorizes. So that's sort of one final ask to this audience is please take your time going through it. Because of the scarcity of the funds, as Patrick highlights, and the speed at which we want to get this relief to everyone on the phone, right? Please double check, triple check the application before you submit it. If it has to be corrected, that will inherently delay this process because it has to come back to you, and then it really has to get back in line for an SBA individual to review. So hopefully that makes sense through the process. So those are the highlights. We went through that very, very quickly, but hopefully that gives you a peek inside the curtain about how we took the application that the SBA put together, translated that into a digital flow. It's all within your browser. We'd recommend, just as a tip and a trick here, of using a very modern browser such as Chrome or Edge. Right? There's some people that have maybe older computers that use Internet Explorer. That's not a supported browser anymore. Microsoft would tell you not to use it. So we also would reiterate that. Use a modern Chrome or Edge type of structure. Safari works fine on Mac as well. And then go through it. I think you'll have a great experience. And the call center is there if you have any questions or need some technical guidance as well. So let me pause there, Nicole, to see if we missed any highlights that you or Patrick want to either go through in more depth or answer any questions here.
No, I think you did it